My daughter-in-law demanded $800 a month in rent from me for a single bedroom in my very own house so she could financially support her own mother. My son didn't say a word, so I just nodded, finished my coffee, and started packing that exact same morning. 3 days later, I was gone. And it was only then that they realized who actually kept that house running. It was exactly 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. My kitchen in Brookline didn't smell like freshly brewed coffee. It smelled like harsh surface cleaner. My daughter-in-law Sloane had unilaterally decided that my trusty old drip coffee maker was unhygienic and had banished it to a dark cabinet. In its place sat a ridiculously expensive shiny espresso pod machine that she hadn't bothered to show me how to use. I sat down at the kitchen table, the one my late husband Warren had built with his own 2 hands, and watched Sloane tap away on her iPad. My son Gavin just stared at his phone in dead silence. "Elaine," Sloane said, not even glancing up from her screen. "We ran the numbers. Since my mom needs help paying for her home health aid now, and inflation is hitting us all so hard, we need to restructure the household finances. Starting next month, you'll need to pay $800 in rent for your room." I froze. This was my house. I had let Gavin and Sloane move in when they were drowning in debt, giving them the entire second floor to help them get back on their feet. "Rent in my own home?" I asked, my voice steady. Sloane gave me a cold, patronizing smile. "Legally speaking, you transferred the deed to us to avoid probate later. Gavin's name is on the paper now. We carry the financial burden of homeownership. Just think of it as doing your part to help out my mother in her time of need." Gavin said nothing. He didn't even lift his eyes from his phone when I stood up. My heart wasn't racing. I just felt this sudden, overwhelming clarity. I had taken them in to help them not to be tolerated as a paying tenant in my own life. Sloane thought she was running the show because she organized the mail. She totally forgot who actually managed the maintenance accounts, the property taxes, and the rainy day funds. I didn't feel hurt anymore. I just felt wide awake. I wasn't going to argue with them. I was going to take action. "I understand," I said simply. I walked to my room, shut the door, and opened my laptop. I didn't look for a lawyer. I looked for a moving company and pulled up the details for a little lakeside condo I owned up in New Hampshire, on Lake Winnipesaukee. I had bought it years ago as a retirement nest egg and had been renting it out. As luck would have it, my tenant had moved out just last month. It was time for a new chapter. Wednesday felt perfectly normal on the surface. Sloane was clearly riding high on her victory. She was ordering me around like I was the hired help. "Elaine, since you're living here, do you think you could handle the weekly grocery run today? Here's the list. Please make sure everything for the kids is organic." She didn't hand me a single dollar bill. A year ago, I would have sighed, just waited for it all. Today, I took the list without a word. I went to the grocery store, but I only bought the bare essentials for myself: bread butter, a little sharp cheddar, and a bag of my favorite ground coffee. When I got back, the house was empty. I used the quiet time to take stock of everything. Over the past 2 years, I had quietly covered almost all the overhead property taxes, homeowners insurance, heating oil. Gavin had claimed he needed his paycheck for his crypto investments. I sat down at my desk and called the insurance agency. "Good afternoon, this is Elaine Baxter. I need to either transfer the homeowners and liability policies into my son's name or cancel them entirely, as I am no longer the financial provider for the property." The agent was very efficient. Since I had been the one paying the premiums for 30 years, canceling it by the end of the month was a breeze. Next, I called the oil company. We had a maintenance and delivery contract that auto-drafted from my account. I canceled the direct debit right then and there. It was late September in New England. A bitter winter was just around the corner, and the oil tank was practically running on fumes. Sloan wanted me to hand over $800 a month in rent fine. That money would now go directly toward funding my own freedom instead of subsidizing her lifestyle. I packed my most important documents into a small, fireproof lockbox. I didn't feel like a victim fleeing her home. I felt like a general strategically withdrawing her troops. From down in the living room, I could hear Sloan laughing on the phone, with her mother bragging that the financial stuff with Elaine is totally handled. I taped my first moving box shut. They really thought I was just part of the furniture. They were about to find out I was the engine keeping the whole house from falling apart. On Thursday morning, Sloan came downstairs expecting my usual breakfast service. Ordinarily, I would have the table set eggs scrambled and fresh bagels waiting. But when she walked into the kitchen, she found a completely bare, spotless counter. I was sitting by the window, quietly reading the morning paper. "Where are the bagels?" she asked, looking genuinely annoyed. I figured that since our relationship is strictly transactional, now it's every man for himself, I replied with a polite smile. Gavin stormed into the kitchen looking frantic. "Mom, I can't find my blue dress shirts. Didn't you iron them?" I just looked at him. My son, a man pushing 40, was apparently incapable of operating an ironing board. "No, Gavin. I needed my time this morning to run my own errands. There's a great dry cleaner right around the corner." Sloan scoffed loudly. "We aren't making you pay $800 a month just so you can sit around doing nothing." I corrected her gently. "You demanded I pay rent. A tenant owes a landlord money, Sloan, not unpaid domestic labor." The air in the room went freezing cold. Sloan slammed a cabinet door and stormed out. She was completely oblivious to the fact that I was already cutting the invisible strings that held their cushy lives together. That afternoon, the HVAC technician arrived for the annual furnace tune-up. I'd known him for years. "Mrs. Baxter, the burner nozzles need replacing. It's gonna run you about $500. Normally, I would have just nodded and written a check. Today, I smiled and said, "You'll need to run that by my son Gavin. He's taking full responsibility for the property now. I'm just a renter." The tech looked a bit confused, but headed upstairs to find Gavin. A few minutes later, I could hear shouting coming from the second floor. Gavin was swearing about the unexpected expense, and Sloan was shrieking that it was my responsibility to pay for it. I just sat in my armchair, hiding a smile behind my book. I had learned more about setting boundaries in the last 3 days than I had in the last 30 years. I was officially done playing the selfless, endlessly sacrificing mother. I knew my worth now. And while my value couldn't be measured in dollars, without it, their little house of cards was going to collapse. The next few days passed in a tense, awkward silence. I played my part perfectly. I kept my spaces spotless. I was painfully polite, but I didn't lift a finger to help them. On Friday evening, an incident finally made Sloan realize the rules of the game had permanently changed. Her mother had come over for a visit. They were sitting out on the patio when Sloan yelled through the screen door, "Elaine, could you bring out some wine and some appetizers? My mom would love some of that baked brie you make." I stepped out onto the patio, empty-handed. "Hi, Mrs. Davis." I greeted her mother cordially. Then I turned to Sloan. "I didn't make any brie today, and the wine in the cellar is my personal stash. I've already boxed it up for my move. I'm sure you can find something at the grocery store, though." Sloan's face turned bright red. "What the hell is your problem lately? You've gotten so unbelievably selfish." I kept my voice perfectly level. I call it personal responsibility, Sloan. You wanted clear financial boundaries. We're just enforcing them. I turned on my heel and walked back to my room. Once inside, I waited for the moving company to call. Monday morning, 8 a.m. perfect. I confirmed quietly. I had already packed up my most cherished heirlooms, my grandmother's antique china, Warren's first edition books, and the good silver into plain cardboard boxes that I labeled Goodwill donations. Gavin and Sloan were way too wrapped up in their own drama to notice that the house was slowly being stripped of its soul. They only saw what was right in front of them. They had no idea I already had the keys to my lake house sitting in my purse. I didn't even feel sorry for Gavin. He had stood by and let his wife try to squeeze me out of my own home just to avoid an argument. If he didn't want the responsibility of standing up for his mother, he was going to have to learn the responsibility of maintaining a home. October was rolling and the oil tank was dangerously close to empty, and it was going to be a very, very cold month for them. Sunday evening was eerily quiet. Gavin and Sloan had gone out to dinner, probably to complain about how stubborn I was being. I used the empty house to finalize everything. My suitcase was packed. My small SUV was parked in the garage, loaded down with the few things I truly cared about. I took one last walk through the house. It was a beautiful building, but it wasn't a home anymore. It was just real estate weighed down by the entitlement of two people who didn't know the meaning of hard work. I didn't leave a dramatic, angry letter. I just left a very clinical list on the kitchen island. It had the trash pickup schedule, the chimney sweep's phone number, and a note stating that the HVAC maintenance contract expired tomorrow. At the very bottom, I wrote, "I've deducted my $800 October rent from the utility overpayments I made earlier this month. We are completely square." When they got home late that night, I could hear them whispering in the hallway. "She's caving," Sloan said, sounding smug. "She'll probably just hand us a check tomorrow, you watch." Gavin mumbled something under his breath. He sounded exhausted. I sat in the dark of my bedroom, feeling a profound sense of relief. I wasn't afraid of being alone at the lake. I was actually looking forward to a silence that wasn't loaded with resentment. I thought about my garden up in New Hampshire. It was the perfect time of year to cut back the perennials. Tomorrow, at this time, I'd be sitting on my deck looking out at the water. Sloan really thought she had backed me into a corner where my only way out was to open my wallet. She forgot that I was the one who built the damn room in the first place. I set my alarm for 6 a.m. It was the last time I would ever sleep under this roof. I took one last look at the framed photo of my husband on the nightstand. "I'm heading out now, Warren," I whispered in the dark. "It's time." Right on the dot at 7:30 a.m., a small moving truck backed into the driveway. Because Gavin and Sloan loved to sleep in and the upstairs was well insulated, they didn't hear a thing. The movers were absolute pros. In under 40 minutes, my remaining furniture, my bed, my desk, and my favorite reading chair was loaded up. I had prepped everything so there wouldn't be a sound. When the truck pulled away, I stood alone in my empty bedroom. It looked so small and meaningless now. I walked out to the foyer and left my house key on the console table. Right next to it, I left a second envelope. It contained the cancellation confirmations for the high-speed internet and the landline, both of which were in my name. Sloan was always whining about the slow Wi-Fi that I paid for. Now she could have the pleasure of setting up a new account herself, which with the local cable company usually took a good 2 weeks. I pulled the front door shut behind me. The click of the lock sounded like absolute freedom. I got into my car and hit the road. As soon as I merged onto the highway heading north, I felt years of heavy, suffocating weight lift right off my shoulders. No more, Elaine, do this. No more, Elaine, pay for that. Around 10 a.m., I glanced at my phone sitting silently on the passenger seat. The screen lit up. Sloan. I ignored it. Then Gavin. Over and over again. They must have finally woken up and discovered the empty room. Or maybe they tried to make themselves a cup of espresso and realized they didn't have the Wi-Fi to Google why the machine was blinking an error code. I kept driving, watching the gorgeous New England autumn roll by. I hadn't just moved out of a house. I had resigned from a job that was slowly killing my spirit. When I finally pulled into Wolfboro, the crisp lake air hit my lungs. The key to the condo turned perfectly in the lock. It was already toasty inside. I had turned the heat on via the smart thermostat 2 days ago. I wasn't a tenant here. I wasn't a burden. Here, I was just Elaine. Around noon, I was sitting at a little cafe by the water, finally checking my messages. It was an absolute digital meltdown. Where are you? What did you do to the Wi-Fi? The heat won't turn on, Elaine. It's freezing downstairs. The last text from Gavin sounded desperate. Mom, please pick up. Sloan is losing her mind. Her mom is coming over this afternoon, and we have absolutely no hot water. I took a sip of my Earl Grey tea. The heat wasn't turning on because the oil tank was bone dry exactly as I had warned them on my list. The fact that they didn't bother to read the list or just didn't take it seriously was strictly a them problem. I typed a single response into the family group chat. I am at my place at the lake. As we discussed, I have taken care of my own financial affairs. Since you are the sole homeowners now, the upkeep of the property is entirely your responsibility. Please only contact me for emergencies regarding my forwarded mail. Sloan fired back a voice memo instantly. She sounded hysterical. You can't just abandon us like this. This is breach of contract. We were relying on your money. My mom needs that cash for her care. I deleted the voice memo halfway through. It was honestly fascinating. Even in the middle of a crisis, it was still entirely about what I was supposed to be doing for them. Not a single, "Are you okay?" or "I'm sorry." Just demands. I put my phone on airplane mode. The lake was completely still. An older couple walked by on the sidewalk, holding hands, and I smiled at them. For the first time since Warren passed away, I didn't feel responsible for the happiness of grown adults who absolutely refused to grow up. I had signed that house over to Gavin to give him a safety net. He had treated it like a blank check for laziness. Now he had to learn that homeownership is a liability, a lesson he was going to learn the hard way when he saw the bill for an emergency same-day heating oil delivery tonight. 2 days later, my phone rang from an unknown number. It was the HVAC guy from the other day. Mrs. Baxter, I can't get a hold of your son, but it's an absolute madhouse over there. The pipes are going to freeze and burst if they don't get oil delivered right now. But the oil company requires upfront payment for emergency drops, and your son's debit card declined. I took a slow, deep breath. Bob, I don't live there anymore. If you need to verify ownership, you can pull the public deed records. My son owns the property. It stung a little bit to be that ruthless, but I knew I had to be. If I swooped in to save them now, nothing would ever change. A little while later, I turned my phone's cellular data back on. Gavin had sent me an email. It was a lot more grounded than his frantic texts. He admitted they had completely screwed up the math. Sloan had taken the money they were supposed to use for the utility bills and spent it on some bougie, expensive life coaching certification course for her mother. They had banked entirely on my $800 rent, plus my usual contributions, to cover the massive shortfall. Without internet, neither of them could work. They both relied on working from home. Without heat, the house was physically unlivable. Gavin asked if I could spot them alone. I replied with 2 sentences, "No, but I do have a suggestion, sell the house. It's way too big for just the 2 of you, and you clearly can't afford the upkeep. Downsize to an apartment that actually fits your budget." The reply came from Sloan, practically vibrating with rage. "Never! It's our inheritance." I just smiled a sad smile. They looked at that house like it was a prize they'd won, not a massive responsibility. But a prize you can't afford to maintain becomes a curse real quick. I spent the rest of my afternoon potting some winter heather for my new balcony. Getting my hands dirty in the soil felt honest and real. My life was simple now, clean, and best of all, entirely debt-free from the heavy expectations of other people. It took exactly 1 week for the inevitable to happen. Gavin called me and his voice sounded totally defeated. He was sitting in his car, the only place he could get warm by blasting the heater. "Sloan went to stay with her mom," he said quietly. "She says she refuses to live in a house that doesn't function." The oil truck showed up, but I couldn't pull together the $4,000 for an emergency fill-up. I felt sorry for him, but it was the kind of detached pity you feel for a stranger who made an obviously terrible choice. "So what's the plan, Gavin?" I asked. "I don't know, Mom. I checked the mail today and found the cancellation notice for the homeowner's insurance. If a pipe bursts now, we're literally bankrupt." I reminded him gently. "I told you 3 months ago that we needed to transfer those policies into your name. You never lifted a finger." It was a harsh pill to swallow. He had just assumed I would quietly fix the problem the way I always did. "I'm putting the house on the market," he finally said. It was honestly the first financially sound decision he had made in his adult life. "That's a smart move, Gavin. If you need a recommendation for a good realtor, let me know. But financially, I am staying out of it." Staying out of. He hung up without saying goodbye. And that was fine. He had to go through the fire on this one. Sloan was probably throwing the tantrum of the century over losing her precious status symbol. But that wasn't my circus anymore. I went for an evening walk alongside the lake. The moonlight was reflecting off the water. I felt incredibly light, almost weightless. The $800 they tried to extort from me was now paying for my own peaceful little life. A life with heat sanity and the absolute certainty that nobody was ever going to touch my coffee maker again. 3 months later, it was a gorgeous, snowy January day at the lake. My condo was toasty and warm, and the whole place smelled like the fresh apple pie I had just pulled out of the oven. I had made a great new group of friends, a local hiking club for seniors, and a fantastic book club. My life was full, completely unburdened by the constant demands of my family. Gavin actually did sell the house. After paying off all their debts and the back taxes they owed, he walked away with a very modest chunk of change. He was living in a small, 1-bedroom apartment closer to the city now. He and Sloan had filed for divorce. Without my bank account acting as a shock absorber, their marriage just couldn't survive the financial reality check. Gavin came up to visit me last week. He looked thinner, but for the first time in his life, he carried himself like a real adult. He brought me a bouquet of flowers paid for with his own hard-earned money. We didn't rehash the past, but right before he left, he hugged me and thanked me for the tough love. I don't regret a single thing. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to step out of the way and let them face the consequences of their own actions. Sloane still sends me bitter, nasty emails every now and then, blaming me for ruining her life. I delete them without reading a single word. My bank account is doing fine, but more importantly, my emotional battery is fully charged. I am no longer good, old, reliable Elaine. I'm just Elaine Baxter, a woman who is thoroughly enjoying her retirement. As I sat by the window today, watching the snow fall over the lake, I realized something freedom starts the exact moment you stop footing the bill for other people's selfishness. I cut myself a slice of pie and smiled. Life was genuinely good because I had finally given myself permission to live it for myself. I was no longer a bank, a hotel, or a scapegoat. I was free. And let me tell you that freedom tasted a whole lot better than any organic coffee from a plastic pod.